Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to take a sledgehammer to one of the most fundamental intuitive beliefs we all hold about our own minds.
And that's how memory works.
Exactly. For most of us, when you think of remembering, you probably picture a massive mental archive.
Right, like a dusty old video library or a giant hard drive in your head.
Yeah, and when you want to recall something, say a high school math equation, or even just the sound of your dog barking, you intuitively feel like you're walking in, pulling the right file, and just pressing play.
That passive storage and retrieval model, it's just so pervasive. And, it makes perfect sense because the actual experience of remembering feels exactly like that. It feels like we're retrieving something perfectly preserved, something that was just sitting there waiting to be accessed.
So when you picture the face of a loved one or that moment from a childhood vacation,
Splashing through the waves, something like that.
right, it absolutely feels like you're sitting back and just passively watching a scene unfold in your own internal cinema.
The ultimate mental time capsule.
We're just popping the lid, retrieving the intact artifact. But the sources we've been reviewing suggest that this common sense idea, which has, by the way, driven cognitive research for decades, is actually a profound illusion.
It is. They argue that if we start thinking about the mind auto-aggressively, and what they mean by that is sort of deliberately challenging our most natural assumptions.
The things that feel most obvious.
Precisely. That common sense notion of memory, it just collapses. It cannot hold up to scrutiny.
That's a really bold claim because, memory retrieval feels instantaneous. It feels incredibly accurate most of the time. So what is the fundamental, shocking counterclaim we're starting with?
The shocking claim is that memories, at least in the way we usually conceive of them,
As these static stored files.
yeah, like a video clip or a photograph waiting in a folder, they actually aren't real. They are not objects waiting to be retrieved.
So it's an illusion of retrieval.
It's an illusion of retrieval because they don't actually exist until the moment we generate them.
Wait, hold on. If I have a memory of my childhood bedroom and I can describe the wallpaper, the carpet, all of it, you're telling me that detailed picture, that specific image, isn't actually stored anywhere in my head? That feels completely counterintuitive.
It is the ultimate counterintuition, but
Yeah.
that is precisely what the research indicates. If memory isn't a passive retrieval system, it has to be an active generation system.
Okay.
So what's happening when you successfully recall your childhood bedroom is that your brain is running a real-time process. It's an engine, not a library.
An engine that constructs the image on command.
Exactly. Think of it like a highly sophisticated AI image generator, or maybe a better way to put it is like a real-time graphics rendering engine in a video game.
Okay, I like that analogy.
You don't store a static picture of the whole game world. You store the rules and the data needed to build that world on the fly.
So you provide an input.
Right. You say, visual imagery system, give me an image of my mom's face, or generate my childhood bedroom. And your cognitive engine just gathers the data points and constructs the image in that very moment.
So the output is perfectly real. The image I see in my mind is concrete and detailed, but the file I think I'm pulling out of storage never existed as a static object. That's the distinction.
That is the critical distinction. If you were able to perfectly scan your brain while you were, say, resting, not actively thinking of your mother, you'd find all the necessary algorithms and parameters needed to build that image.
But not the image itself.
But the image itself, it doesn't exist anywhere in the system. It's not in your brain as a stored file. It only exists when the right input triggers the generation process.
It fundamentally changes what we consider a memory to be. It feels like we're confusing the successful outcome of a process with the process itself.
We are. And this is why the sources are really careful to clarify the paradox here. If memories aren't real as objects, why do they feel so reliable?
Right, so concrete.
Because they are very real in the most crucial sense. The ability to generate them on demand is reliable. The capability to successfully reconstruct that visual information, that is what it means to remember.
So remembering is an active capability. It's a performance.
Not a passive object retrieval.
Exactly. And if we accept this generative model, the implications for how we understand learning and, well, cognition in general become immense.
Oh, absolutely.
Because if memory were just retrieving a fixed file, I'd only be able to see, say, the specific angle of my mother's face that I stored in that file. But that's clearly not the case.
Precisely. If it were a fixed file system, we'd be completely stuck. But because memory is a creative, generative engine, you don't just recall one single static image.
You can instantly picture your mother from the side
Or from 5 feet away, or making your breakfast as a little kid.
Yeah.
Or even, and this is the kicker, standing on the moon.
Whoa, it's standing on the moon. I definitely do not have a stored memory file of my mother standing on the moon.
No.
But I can generate that image instantly.
And that demonstrates the generative power perfectly. The system doesn't just play back old video clips. It uses the stored data, her appearance, what you know about gravity, light, clothing, to render a totally customized, never-before-seen scene.
Based on underlying relationships and rules, you can just change the perspective, the setting.
The action, anything, instantly.
Yeah.
That dynamic manipulation, that infinite flexibility is what the sources label endless potentiation.
Potentiation meaning capacity or potential.
Exactly.
Hey,
Because the system is constantly generating, not just retrieving a copy. We have the potential to do basically anything we want with the content. It's infinite possibility.
I think this endless potentiation concept is where this deep dive moves from, interesting philosophy to really practical application for the listener. If my memory engine has infinite flexibility, how does that translate to practical knowledge? Let's take something complex, like, say, the principles of thermodynamics.
Okay. If you approach thermodynamics from that old storage and retrieval model, you're trying to perfectly store the 3 laws. When you need them, you pull the file.
Rote memorization.
But when you approach it generatively, you train your mind not just to recite the laws, but to instantly generate a scenario where those laws are applied dynamically.
So instead of just recalling the definition of entropy, I would instantly generate a mental model of, like, a messy room getting messier, or a hot coffee cup cooling down.
Exactly. You are training the engine to run the simulation, not just recall the datasheet. If you could instantly generate a hypothetical scenario involving heat exchange in a car engine, you're demonstrating potentiation.
So the system is showing it has encoded the principles deeply enough to project them into a new situation.
A novel, yet internally consistent scenario. And that is so much more valuable than just recalling a static definition.
This raises a profound issue for anyone involved in learning, whether that's in education or just self-improvement.
For sure.
If memory is about ensuring future generation, not storing past files, how does that change the fundamental question of how we study?
It forces a complete reformulation. The old model, the storage model, it dictates the question, how do I store this information now perfectly so I can later retrieve the exact same thing?
Which encourages rote learning, like you said?
Yes, but the generative view,
Yeah.
it changes the mission entirely. The relevant question becomes, how do I encode this information now to ensure a high probability that my engine will successfully and flexibly generate that content and manipulate it across different contexts later on?
The focus shifts from the static storage to the creative capacity of the engine.
Completely.
Now, we have to address the decades of research in the field of learning. I mean, the entire education system is structured around tests, review, spaced repetition, all mechanisms for better storage and retrieval. Are we saying all that is now moot?
Not at all. And the sources are very clear on this. There is a vast, empirically validated literature on how to encode information for later retrieval. We know that if you learn better under certain circumstances,
It's like through practice testing.
right, it shows up in measurable, real-world ways like later job performance or later academic performance. Those findings are absolutely valid. They work.
So the tools work, but the philosophical foundation, the why they work, might be flawed.
That's the nuance we need to grasp. The findings are robust, but the original characterization of memory as cold storage has almost certainly dramatically influenced the way that this field evolved.
So we've been focused on organizing and packaging information, like we're perfectly labeling files.
We may have missed other potentially more powerful levers for improving the generative capacity itself.
Okay, let's try to make this concrete. What does this generative view actually offer us in terms of, say, new tools or interventions that the old retrieval view might obscure?
Well, the retrieval view treats memory like a pause button. Once the information is stored, you just wait for the demand.
Right.
The generative view sees memory as a much more continuous generative process, a much more dynamic thing. It's always active, always ready to render.
And if the process is continuous, then we have way more intervention points to enhance the process itself, not just the quality of the initial input.
Precisely. Thinking dynamically reveals far more actual tools and points of intervention at our disposal. The retrieval model focuses on input and output.
Fidelity.
Yes, fidelity. The generative model lets us focus on the algorithms and the rules of the engine itself.
So what might a generative learning tool even look like then?
Well, if the goal is maximizing generation, the intervention should force dynamic manipulation. So instead of testing yourself by just retrieving a definition,
Which is what a flashcard does.
a generative test would be something like, take this concept and describe 3 distinct novel scenarios where its application would fail. Or instantly generate an analogy for this historical event using only concepts from astrophysics.
Ah, I see. You're not just recalling stored data, you're forcing the system to actively construct new frameworks using the learned relationships.
Exactly. We're moving away from training the mind to be a good copy machine and toward training it to be an expert conceptual architect.
We're looking for these other kinds of tools and frameworks that are sitting right in front of us.
If we just accept this view, it really challenges educators to design curriculum that explicitly demands flexibility and projection, not just factual recall.
You know, the storage model also really struggles to explain things like suggestibility or how false memories are formed.
It does, massively.
If memories were fixed files, they should be immune to external influence, but we know they aren't. Does the generative model handle this better?
It explains it perfectly. If remembering is a constructive process run by an engine, that engine relies on current context, emotional state, the input prompt you give it.
So if the input is biased, like a leading question in an interview,
the engine generates a memory that incorporates that new, subtle piece of data. The memory is manufactured at that moment, which means it can be manufactured slightly differently every single time.
So the image I generate today is subtly different from the one I'll generate tomorrow.
Even if the underlying rules stay the same, that's what gives us imagination and problem-solving ability. But the trade-off is it makes the memory susceptible to error.
That is a staggering implication. It means even when we feel like we're perfectly retrieving the past, we're always constructing a slightly edited version.
Memory is inherently fluid.
This brings us to the final critical research questions raised by this perspective, which are so relevant for anyone listening. How does thinking of memory as a generative process change how we educate, and maybe more importantly, how we ourselves digest and process information?
It leads to this realization that successful learning might not just be about external input, but about internal manipulation. The most powerful question the sources raise is this: what internal cognitive frameworks can we autonomously induce?
What can we consciously do to optimize that creative process?
For the things we truly want to solidify, yes.
So instead of just focusing on the flashcards, we should be focusing on the internal mental exercises that maximize our engine's rendering capacity.
Absolutely. Are there techniques we can use? Maybe forcing immediate projection into the future or rapid scenario building that encode the rules more flexibly rather than just encoding the definitions more faithfully?
So the active mental work you do after you read an article or attend a lecture is vastly more critical than we thought.
That's the moment the generative engine is truly being calibrated.
This whole deep dive has just completely reframed the conversation. Memory isn't a mental time capsule we passively pull from.
It's an engine that actively constructs the past anew every single time we remember.
Remembering is an active, dynamic construction of a scene, a concept, or an event.
And if we accept that the mind has this capability for endless potentiation, this ability to generate and reconfigure concepts on command, we need to stop treating learning like filling a vault. We need to start treating it like designing a high-performance cognitive simulator.
That's a great way to put it.
We spend so much time focusing on the content we learn. But perhaps the most valuable question for the future is what proactive, internal cognitive frameworks we can autonomously induce to maximize that generative ability, especially for information that is really important, precious, and valuable for navigating the world. That internal calibration, that might be the greatest superpower we possess.